Welcome to my humble abode. I'm Dr. Tailspinner. This Tales over Coffee, where we start the day with a narrative game, a cup of coffee, in the hope of welcoming a blessed day. Return now to Ukraine war stories, and we're starting the final and third story, Mariupol. February 24th, Victor. Kornienko, wake up! Make some tea if you have to. The head doctor's shout jolted me awake. It was still more pleasant than my awakening a few hours earlier from the shells hitting the city. We don't have much time, and I'm not going to repeat myself. Is that clear? Sir, yes, sir, I fired off, sitting straight up. Victor Dumko, the head doctor, smirked a little. His fame as a former army medic was legendary, and now he gathered all the ward managers for a proper war briefing. My head was still reeling from it all. An invasion? Really? The war wasn't going to remain frozen for decades. Since 2014, everybody had gotten used to the occasional distant explosions. If anything, over the last several decades, the city had been bustling. I saw it change from a Soviet industrial port into a quaint European town, the kind where I would go for various international conferences. And now, in the earliest hours of February 24th, my quaint European Mariupol being bombed by the Russians. My girlfriend Anya and I woke up around 4, and from the first explosions. It must have taken us about 10 minutes to get dressed and drive to the hospital. I was the head of surgery and she, my assistant. And even if this wasn't a full invasion, explosions in the city meant we'd soon have our hands full. In the next few days, public services will be down. No heating, no running water. We must stock up on essential supplies. Gauze, medication, even bunks. We had our hands full with COVID, and this will be a million times worse. Shops will soon close, and we'll stop the house calls. So whatever we can buy or order, it needs to be done today. You hear me? He looked at our supply manager, Ole, who hastily nodded in confirmation. A funny, rotund old Greek. He knew his business when it came to numbers. The Russians will consider the hospital a legitimate target, as they did in Donbass back in 2014. We'll need to vacate the upper floors and reinforce the ground floor. Last but not least, ward managers. We all looked up. Until the war is over, you are my lieutenants. Organize your teams, make sure everybody knows their rules, go over the triage rules, and go over them again. Victor seemed to have his head completely clear. Small wonder he was a Soviet officer, an army medic during the war in Angola. When I was dismissed, I left the office. I had no idea what to do. Annie was already in the hallway, and she hopped up to me the moment I was out. How was it? What did he say? Not that much, and a whole lot at the same time. What mattered was what I was going to do. The building reinforced. I gathered the rest of the ward and relayed Victor's instructions. We were going to do something well, we'd have to focus on one task at a time. I decided we'd help reinforce the hospital. We stripped the upper floors of equipment and got the territorial defense to share some sandbags. They went toward reinforcing ground floor windows, instantly making the place feel safer. I didn't know how much they'd help, but at the end of the day, nobody felt like their efforts had been wasted. Still, I wondered if this was the best use of our time. On that first uncertain day, nothing was guaranteed. If only I'd known back then how bad it could really get. Hospital readiness up, Dima's mood is up. Dr. Kornienko, do you have a moment? The supply manager's round face peeked inside. Not at the moment, no, I shouted back. Wait till I'm done. In fact, I was almost done, but I needed to focus. After several hours of pulling bone fragments from a shattered shoulder, messing up the suturing wound would be an embarrassment. The wounded had been coming in since February 24th. Dozens every hour, and I'd seen more in those few days than I had in my 10 years of practice. Concussions, shrapnel injuries, missing limbs, ugly, torn wounds, The kind that fought you every step of the suturing process. The woman brought in that afternoon had her shoulder and clavicle completely crushed. She was so worn out by the pain she couldn't speak, only wheeze feebly. By the time it was evening, her case was our small victory of the day. We didn't just save her life, but her arm too. Thank God for Anya and her nerves. She was terrified of moths, but she handled blood better than most men. Ole, our supply manager, was waiting for me outside. He was talking to a small boy with a face red and wet with tears. The little guy kept sniffling while Ole cooed over him like a doting grandpa. What is it, Ole? Who's the kid? Where are his parents? This is Danya. He says he's hurting. Could you take a look? I was going to tell Ole to take the boy to a GP and stop wasting my time, but just then he drew closer and whispered. His father brought him here. He didn't make it. Bled out in the parking lot. Please, doctor. Everybody else is busy. The kid only spoke in short, choppy sentences. No bloody wonder there, is there? He said his name was Danya, short for Danilo. He turned 6 last August. His mother was an accountant, his father was in the army, and that day something small flew into their apartment. It was loud and then I couldn't hear anything. Me and Dad looked for Mum but couldn't find her. There was dust everywhere and red stuff too. I gulped. Next he told me how he and his dad had to run outside because the ceiling had started to collapse. A piece of it had hit Danya, and now his side was hurting. It was just a big bruise, thank heavens. No fractures, no internal bleeding. Bad news is, you'll have to sleep on one side for a few days. Good news is, I cut myself off. The boy was in no danger, sure, but the only good news I had with Danny was, this could have been much worse. I asked if he had any other relatives in the mainland, anyone I could evacuate to. Only in Russia, he said. I cursed silently. Just brilliant. It was getting late, and the boy needed a place to sleep. There was a room in the basement, but a night in that iodine-smelling catacomb wasn't going to be easy for a scared kid. Of course, I could just give him my cot. Anya and I had two of those brought to a tiny room in the basement level, turned into my new office. And again, I needed to rest too. I was going to have steady hands in the morning. Yeah, if I was anyone else, I would give him my cot. But I'm Dima, I'm in charge of saving everyone. I can't save everyone, I have to make decisions. He'll have to be with the other patients. We couldn't make any exceptions, the hospital was already overflowing. Danya had a place to rest and that freed me up for my immediate tasks. And I had plenty of those. I hoped nobody down there would be angry with him. With everybody on edge, tensions were flaring. The boy would just have to handle it. In the coming days, many more kids would be brought into the hospital. Our supply manager Ole worked for 2 at that time, both keeping the hospital stocked and the children entertained. He had quite a way with them. Me, I wouldn't know what to do with kids, and if I did, I had my hands full with all the wounded. They only kept arriving. By the second week of the war, we'd run out of bunks. The wounded, meanwhile, only kept coming. We had to start putting them on the floor, on bare mattresses, covered with improvised bedding. 2022's March was cold, and we feared a breakout of respiratory infection. COVID was fresh on everyone's mind. At least, there was a silver lining. It snowed heavily, and snow could be melted down to water. Usually, we had to get the water from a pump nearby, but then we risked being caught in the open. Sometimes the city's utility workers brought in tanks of water, but only when it was safe. Our main problem, however, was something else. Russian forces were dismantling Mariupol brick by brick. Our wounded told us that the Russians were shelling entire neighborhoods for no good reason. Planes, rockets, artillery and tanks. They'd brought it all to my city, and their weapons never ceased firing. It was a tough time, but we held fast and did our job. We fought for people's lives and we fought tooth and nail. That's what kept us going. We had little time for resting. And when I did rest, after everything I had to see and deal with, my head would go to a very dark place. But humans aren't made of iron. As a doctor, I knew that much. Sometimes I had to take breaks, usually in the evening, when the influx of new patients was lower. I tried to spend all of my very limited free time with Anya. Only when the war began did I realize how lucky I was to have her. Anya was my ray of light in all this mess. Danya often joined us too, or rather, we tried to include him. He was alone in the world like neither of us was, and so Anya and I did our best to provide him with our company. Sometimes I wondered who got more out of it, him or us. After all, our little talks helped us hold on to some fleeting feeling of normalcy. I'd never considered having children before. I'd been aiming for a medical career since childhood, and I wasn't the one to compromise on it. Daniel turned out to be very clever for his years. Talking to him was surprisingly engaging. The boy managed to recover somewhat and talked to us quite a bit. Sometimes he asked questions that completely blindsided me. When this happened, Anya was having the time of her life. I wasn't mad. I deserved to be a little humbled, and I loved the sound of her laughter too much. By now, we'd noticed that the shellings would intensify towards the evening, so we tried to take shelter at those times just in case. I'd converted a broom closet on the basement level into our new sleeping spot. That evening, we gathered there by the candlelight. It was almost cozy. Anya recalled her student years, and it reminded me of my own experiences as a trainee almost a decade ago. Danya joined in with some stories from his first years of school. Me and Anya had forgotten how stressful those stories could be. Boom. The building shook with a deep rumble and infernal clattering of windows upstairs. The ceiling rained plaster down on us, and I tackled Danya and Anya to the ground, covering them with my body. The candle lighting the room fell over, plunging us into darkness. Anya dug her nails into my hand, and Danya crawled toward the wall. I tensed up, expecting further hits, but there were none. A few minutes later, we heard rushed footsteps, and someone banged on our door. Dima, Anya, are you still alive? I'd recognize Victor's voice anytime. I think so. I lit the room with my phone's flashlight and looked Anya and Danya over. They were both unharmed, thank God. On your feet then, part of the building collapsed. We might have people under the rubble. I helped Anya stand up. We grabbed a first aid kit and opened the door when I heard Danya yelp. Guys, can I come with you? Don't leave me alone. He was looking at me with scared eyes. What was I supposed to do with him? Task. Absolutely. Find a task. Apparently Anya won't like it. That's when we're rushed, and that I always try and play according to the character, and that's where my mind goes as a scientist, as someone with a job to do. Find a task. I know he needs direction. There we go. I looked the kid up and down. Of course, putting him to work would be perfect. There were no tasks for a little kid in our hospital, or maybe, fine. You'll be bringing the bandages from the storeroom when we need them. Dima, let's not. It must be hell up there, and he pleaded. The things he might see there, he's seen them, Anya. Seen plenty already. I sighed, then added barely above a whisper. But you know the state his father was in. Besides, I'm not taking him to assist with surgery. He can help out with wound dressing or bring more bandages if someone runs off. He'll feel useful and be around people. Anya hesitated but ultimately agreed. Sometimes when someone's stressed, all you can do is direct them, simple direction, get them to do something, get their mind occupied. With no more distractions, we rushed toward the lobby. The night was going to be long. It took us until morning to start clearing the debris. Oh, and that doesn't mean you just bury your problems, by the way. That means sometimes when it's at its peak, all you can do is go forward, go forward, go forward, one foot in front of the other, until you're able to deal, until there's calm that you can deal with. It took us until morning to clear the debris. Exhausted, me and Anya sat down against the wall in the lobby, watching the dead being rolled into white sheets. That night cost us 4 patients. 2 more were missing, including our supply manager. The old Greek, Ole Pichaki. Perhaps he got buried under the rubble. The war kept taking people from us. Anya's mood is down to 1, and Daniel's mood has gone to 3. You're lucky to be alive, you know that? I mumbled to the soldier. And we were looking at his uniform indicated his blood type, right below his off breast patch. I could immediately tell my nurse for type A negative. Pierced femoral artery. I could tell from the man's skin colour that he'd need at least 2 bags. That morning the military brought in several of their wounded. Most of them only needed their wounds dressed, but one soldier was critical. A young fellow they called Hindu. I quickly found out why. If I die, I'll just wake up in a new body, he grinned through pain, with all the blood still in it. He was barely lucid, worn out by pain and blood loss, but could still tell jokes. I was honestly baffled. If I were him, I'd be screaming my head off. Some people, humour's the ultimate defence. We couldn't snipe him back. It was holed up good, 2nd floor, so he pantomimed aiming and firing a rocket launcher several times. Boom! Brought the 3rd floor down on him. Hindu grinned again. As I finished inspecting his leg, I awkwardly smiled back. Of course I was glad to hear our soldiers were fighting the Russians off, but I had bigger problems on hand. There was no exit wound on Hindu's thigh. There was still a bullet stuck inside. Damn it. Dima. Hearing Anya's voice was a relief. I'd need an assistant. You're here, good. We've got surgery coming up. Hindu, this is Dr. Filipchuk. She will... That's when I saw the soldier had passed out. Dima, they brought in a woman, shrapnel injuries, heavy bleeding. None of the relatives knew first aid. I rushed to check the pulse. It was there, but weak and uneven. I needed to remove the bullet as soon as... Hold on. What woman? Oh God, I'm sorry. I tried to help, but... Another woman cried. I turned around and saw them. Anya, the woman who spoke, and the wounded one lying on the mattresses. I could see blood-soaked gauze showing from under her clothes, deep crimson and soaked through, barely stopping any bleeding. Doctor, please, she's my sister. She's got... Oh goodness, she has kids back home. Oh God, I don't want to make this decision that's coming up. I felt Anya grab me by the sleeve, snapping me out of my daze. I pointed towards Hindu. This man is in critical condition. Someone has to be... Mila had kids. Mila was dying. More orphans were in the making. As if poor Danya's eyes hadn't been stuck in my head already. But she couldn't wait. But neither could Hindu. I don't want to make this decision. Closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Anya, get the tools you're assisting. We'll operate. I don't think we can do both. This drops the hospital readiness if we do this. We have to try. Both. Neither can wait, we'll be operating on them both. I looked over both patients. I could help Hindu quicker and let Anya take over while I moved on to Miller, the hard case. Until then, Anya would have to keep her from bleeding out. Shit, she cut herself off. Before all this, she despised swearing. Sorry, okay. If you're sure we can do this. I wasn't sure. Ideally, I had to have 4 hands, but I didn't. Anya's hands would have to suffice. She was an extremely competent doctor, but she had never conducted an operation by herself before. But with her talent, some of my skill should have rubbed off on her. Thankfully, the bullet didn't split apart inside the wound, something I'd seen smaller calibers do a lot. No, this was in one piece, ugly and deformed. I extracted it bit by bit, sometimes watching over the wounded woman, pulling out a fragment or two, then going back to Hindu. Anya handled the secondary tasks, hooking up the IVs, detoxification, antibiotics and painkillers. She too worked on 2 patients at once. When I needed her to take over, she followed every instruction, and when I couldn't provide them, her instincts were superb. And in the end, both Mila and Hindu would live. We put the metal we extracted on the same tray, ugly edged shell fragments, next to a single warped and bloody drenched 7.62mm bullet. Grisly. It was a testament to 2 saved lives. We'll end there for now. On a success. Hit the like, comment and subscribe if you want the channel to grow. Enjoy your coffee if you can. Very well.